Hi, I'm Tim. Join me in this video as we build the Piper Super Cub, and what I'm going to show you in this video is how to install the ParkZone electronics into the aircraft easily so that you can have a radio control model of this Guillows kit. Let's get to it. This is the ParkZone brick we'll demonstrate in the installation. We'll use as an example the Guillows Piper Super Cub. A complete description of the build is in the description. And the plane flew pretty well. It's a little bit squirrely, but more details in the build of the Piper Super Cub. To control and power this model of the Guillows Cub, I'm going to use the ParkZone Ultra Micro RC equipment. There'll be a description in the link of a video where to get this. I get mine from Steven Zero, and this is a remarkable system. This little 1/2 ounce brick, we have 2 linear servos, a receiver, and an electronic speed control. This is how we connect to the battery, and this is the motor, again a geared brushed motor that should provide plenty of power for up to 3 ounces on this model. This is the antenna to the brick. I call it a brick. This is a typical Z-bend. Let me get it around here. And I want to point out that there is a front and a back to this brick. What will happen is you'll notice on the 2 linear servos, there's a gear to the little electric motor that makes this go back and forth. I'll turn it on in a second. This has to go back to control surfaces because if you have a bend, the gear rod, the gear is in the way. So if this is going towards the rear, it will not interfere with the gear. This is where the motor plugs in to the brick. And so let's turn it on and see how it works. It is bonded to this DX6 transmitter. It's important that you turn on the transmitter first so it sees the signal. Otherwise, when you plug it in, it goes into the bind mode after about 5 seconds. This is a 1-cell, 150 milliamp LiPo. There is polarity on this. You can't see it clearly, but there's a little extension that comes out here. It's a base, if you will, for the controller. So this is the top. Oftentimes there's a red dot on the bottom. You just have to look, but there should be some little buildup that makes that the bottom. We simply plug this in. So the light's on, it's a steady light, and we're connected. So let's take the transmitter, and if you look here, this is up, down, left, right for the 2 servos, and then for the throttle, I'll hold this and be a little bit careful. Again, all kinds of thrust for a 3-ounce model. So this is just a absolutely magic, wonderful thing, and it works just fine in these smaller Guillows aircraft. What I'd like to do now is just to take a moment to give you my thoughts and demonstrate how we install this ultra micro ParkZone brick into the Piper Cub. And the key thing is we want to keep it as far forward for center of gravity purposes, and because it's a little bit tricky installation, we absolutely want to put it into the fuselage before we add all the 1/16 inch square balsa stringers on the outside. It's impossible to get to once that's in place. We'll put everything in, hook it up, make sure everything works, then we add the stringers, cover the fuselage, and you'll be good to go. But the real thing that I want to discuss now, this is very important for your conversion of these smaller Guillows kits or any Guillows kits to radio control flight, is the installation of the electronics. So this is a fuselage to date, and the key thing is when you build the fuselage, if you can look on this diagram right here, you can see that there's a series of 1/16 inch square balsa that are the stringers that make up the fuselage. We will put those stringers all along here, but we want to install the electronics before we put on the stringers so we have full access to the interior of the airplane. So let me describe that right about now. So this is the ParkZone brick. This is the ESC, servos, receiver, all in one unit. And what will happen is in the fuselage, I'll make a little shelf and I'll put the brick just like that inside the fuselage. I'll try to keep it as far forward as I can for center of gravity, but that'll fit okay in the fuselage. It's just wide enough. Notice also, as I mentioned before, the front are these gears right here. The back with the antenna goes this way so the control rods can go straight back. So what will happen is tomorrow I'll make a little wood shelf and I will glue this in place. Before I do that, the other thing I want to mention are the control rods. What I do, you can just barely see this, it's very fine music wire. This is 0.025 inch music wire. You want it very lightweight so that it is not heavy. It can fit inside the holes in the ParkZone brick. And the key thing is, we're going to cut a little bit longer length, about this long right here. We're going to connect it to the front of the ParkZone brick so that we can install it before we put on the stringers and just have the control rod exit somewhere back here. There'll be two control rods, one for the rudder, one for the elevator. One will go out one side, one will go out the other side. It doesn't matter which side. Once it's installed, we can see those push rods going back and forth from the rudder and elevator. The other very important trick, and this will save you a lot of heartache, once the brick is glued into place and the long control rod is installed, I'll put on the tail surfaces so I know exactly where the control horns are for the rudder and the elevator. I will trim this music wire an inch or so short. I will make another smaller section of music wire with a Z-bend, just like at the front, to put into the control horn back here. And then what I do is I pretend this is the long rod. I take a little bit of heat shrink tubing. I put the other rod in like this, and I can very accurately adjust it so the elevator and rudders are neutral. When I have it adjusted just right, I'll take a heat gun, shrink the heat shrink tubing, and what you'll have is something like this, a little dab of glue, so it's fixed in place at just the correct distance between the control surfaces to the electronic controls. So this way it can be installed with the rods in place. I can add the 1/16 inch balsa around that so it's built in place. I don't have access to it, but it's the easiest way to get that installed. And remember to keep everything as far forward as possible for center of gravity. Now the other thing that you have to do is think about the placement of the motor. Okay, so this is the ParkZone motor with the gearing right here. It's just a standard motor, good for about a 3-ounce model. And what I do is I take the plastic cowl. This is where the cowl goes on here on the nose. And what I'll do tomorrow is just kind of eyeball where the motor goes. Is just about 1/4 of an inch up from the firewall. I will mark on this how far up and down the mounting bracket is. And then I will build from scrap wood a mounting for the motor, just glue it onto place so it's the correct distance out, height down to put the cowl on over the motor. And that's what I do, so the motor will be all in place. A little bit of right thrust, a little bit of down thrust. The other thing that I've got to do is I've got to figure out where to place the LiPo battery. The battery is always a problem because it's bigger than the airplane. I don't know exactly right now where I'm going to place the battery. What I will do is I will put in the electronics, I'll put in the motor, see how it balances out. I might do a little cutout under the cowl to put that on the front, have it hang out. Sometimes I can make a little shelf on the back. I'll figure that out after everything is in place, the best place for the battery. There's no elegant option with these smaller models with the size of the battery. I've completed the installation of the ParkZone equipment and the motor and the control rods, and landing gear. So let me describe that before we do the covering of the balsa stringers. So here's the fuselage right here. The landing gear is shown here with these wheels, and I'll slide these off. We'll install them later. The landing gear are these, I just epoxied in the music wire. I just bent a kind of shape around there, and that works out well. That'll work out fine. Here is the tray I mentioned for the ParkZone brick, and that is glued in place. And here's a brick, and you can see the Z-bends on each control rod that extend back through the fuselage and go out here, plenty of length. I can overlap and connect them to the rudder and elevator. I put in a little guide here to keep from flexing. I think that's all you need for these short runs. And then I had to carve out a little bit of space back here to make sure they can extend out. So that is complete there. The motor, I made a little shelf of 3 layers of 1/16 inch balsa. The motor is taped in place. I'll eventually glue that onto the motor mount at the correct height and distance for the cowl. With these motors, the propeller is screwed onto the drive shaft of the motor. If you screw the propeller on and off a lot, it's going to get loose. I've gotten in the habit of just leaving it screwed on when it's on there. That seems to work better, and that's what we'll do. Notice also that I had to make allowances, cuts, for the black and white motor wires to go through the firewall, through this little hole, then back connecting to the rear of the brick. So that is correct. Remember, there has to be the right polarity to have the prop spin the right way. Just flip it if it's the wrong way. The antenna is cleared here, and then I had to make a little cutout here and here for the motor, the battery connector. And I'll put the battery, I think, there's no great solution, somewhere along here on the nose. It's just where the battery is going to have to go. But I'll sort that out as I build the rest of the model. So what I'll do right now is install the cowl. This is the cowl. Because I want to keep the propeller on the motor, just to prevent from doing it off and on, I've just split the cowl, and this will fit over the shaft. So we'll do that right now. And that's about what the cowl is going to look like onto the motor. So now that I've done all this, I can start putting in the stringers and the side panels and all that, building up the fuselage because it's done. What we'll do now is test out the motor and the controls. What we do, we turn the radio on first, so the system does not go into the bind mode. This is on, it's on the Piper Cub low throttle. And I will plug it in. We get our steady green light, and if you take a look at the top of the controls here, this is the elevator. Rudder works fine there. Then we'll point the motor away, make sure we can clear the prop, and plenty of power for this smaller model. So that's where we are with the model, and we'll put on the stringers now, and then we'll be ready to cover it after that. This is a view of the completed fuselage installation. You can see the brick in place with its push rods going out the back, the motor with a little bit of down and right thrust epoxied in place, and the leads for the battery connector. Rudy, thank you for stopping by. We're going to have to do a little video segment now. Is that okay with you? Thank you, Rudy. We have finished pretty much the installation of the ParkZone equipment in the Piper Super Cub. So I've put in the 1/16 inch square stringers. I have access for the motor cable here, connector. I'm still figuring out exactly what to do with that. The nature of this design, the pants are built in, or the strut fairings are built in, so that's there. And you can just see how if you try to do anything to put this in with the 3/16, you're just not going to get there. So everything is connected with the control runs. As you saw before, they go out to the back. What will happen is I will next cover the elevator, put it on. This is what the control horn looks like on the elevator. So you have a horn down here. I'll trim these a little bit shorter in length. There'll be a Z-bend to the control horn on the elevator. This is the extension from the fuselage, and we just overlap that with a heat shrink tubing. Turn on the radio, adjust this to just the right distance, heat shrink it, glue it, and then everything is connected for the rudder and elevator on this plane. Note also the engine mount installation is complete. That fits in with the cowl. This is epoxied in place. Some popsicle sticks on the side just to give it a little bit more strength. And I also, just for your background information, trimmed off the top of the fuselage. So this is the completed wing. It'll go on like this. That's what it will look like eventually. So we're getting pretty close. The next thing will be to sand everything, put on a few more parts, cover it, and then we should be ready to fly. But that is just in a nutshell how we can install the ParkZone equipment with the coverings, and the battery will go in somewhere here. I'll figure that out with the cowl, keep it forward for center of gravity, and that should be a good starting point for your Guillows RC model airplane. So to show you the completed installation, this is a completed model. This is the battery. It weighs about 2/10 of a gram, the 150 LiPo single cell. I'll leave that outside, and I'll show you again, the controls, we have the heat shrink tubing with the overlapping music wire for the rudder, a little bit of glue in place, and the, for the rudder and the elevator. So that works out fine. As we showed through the whole diagram, I want to show you what it looks like with a completed installation. And this is up elevator, down elevator, left, right, and then the throttle. So I hope this video is helpful. It shows you how you can fairly easily install this ParkZone brick. The key thing is planning ahead, doing it early on in the fuselage construction, and you're basically building it in place. Good luck with your build.